This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial, and this is Sunday, 24th of April, 2022. And I'm at the moment in a hospital with a minor problem, and so your image will be that of a hospital bed. Apart from that, I am very concerned about some of the regional planning we've been doing. I am been constantly working at the not-for-profit level. Not-for-profits are established by the federal government and the state governments. They want people to think and dream and do things. So you have a region which is very, very rich in agricultural land. It's glacial till brought down from Canada from rock and rubble. It was very rich, and it's mixed, and it is excellent for farming. So it has been taken over for farming and roads and cities, and there is almost no prairie left. It's almost extinct. That's 10,000, or some people think it's 17,000 years since glaciers removed. They left morainic hills, and the one we work with is called the Bloomington Moraine. It's a continental glaciation, and it departed at least 10,000 years ago. It had ice on top. Sometimes it might have been 200 feet high, but often was only about 4 feet high. But the water would dribble out onto outwash plains, and those plains were wet and swampy, but when drained, they were really very rich. That's where rich drummer and Flanagan soils are. So we're looking at a region that has very few rail trails. The rest of the country has lots of rail trails, especially in areas where mining was retreated, or across deserts where there's not a lot of vegetation on either side. But here, every inch of land on the side of a railroad is worth money. So you often find that the adjacent farmer will move in on the railroad some, and it will invade. There are little plots of land that are remnant prairies, 10,000 years old. That's what we're looking for. That's where the genetics is. That's where, if you're in medicine, you need that biochemical that you don't know about in the future. There are a few little cemeteries that have had set aside land that in prairie time, so they're also preservation areas. These corridors are useful, especially for recreation. Their recreation dominates preservation. So you often will lose a lot of your vegetation on the side of a ballast or a retired railroad, because the trails want to be wide. They don't need to be that wide if we want to preserve some of the dignity of our genetics. I've talked about this before, but it behooves being repeated many times, because we have a region that is from Danville to Champaign-Urbana to Decatur. It extends to St. Louis. It extends to Indianapolis. It extends to Chicago, and west to Lincoln. We have at Monticello an attractive resource for people to visit. Champaign County is a very flat county. It was 94% prairie, not many trees. Those trees were centered around the river, mainly the Sangamon, but there are 5 rivers that exit from the moraine that we're talking about. Yankee Ridge to the south, Champaign Moraine, Livington Moraine. These are all 50, 100 feet high lumps of gravel. The gravel is very good road pack, so many of those moraines have been mined for gravel. And so that leaves a hole, and that hole can repair, because around the edges of the borrow pit, which is it was felt that when they took the gravel, they would make a side road and then return it. So it's known as a borrow pit. It's a gravel pit with lots of glacial till, and it has enough decayed geological matter that makes a good sticky road, and it's used thus. But around the edges, there's preservation. And if you look at the site that we most usually refer to, you have an old road adjacent, and you have an old interurban, and then you have a main line. So if you're doing an east-west transect, you're going to cross some existing remnant prairie, and you're going to encounter a prairie that's drawn on a retired interurban train corridor that has been retired many years ago. So we take that seed and we spread it on the gravel pit, the borrow pit, and let it grow. So we have in this region, Danville to Decatur, focusing on Monticello area. Monticello area is attractive for people, locals as well as tourists, and sometimes also internationals. People have a little bit of time to find out who you are and what you do and what is your status and what is important for you. So Monticello has a Cerro Gordo moraine, so it gives you rolling territory. It has a river, the Sangamon River, and that first settlers came up the Sangamon River, especially when it was in flood, and you could negotiate it. It has an antique town there. It's a square exists where many towns have taken their square out. It has a natural areas. Allerton Park has 2,000 or 3,000 acres of open space, and Lodge Park, which is loaded with spring herbs almost at the moment. There is a railroad museum, and all these things add to an attraction. And especially this city was renowned for a pepsin factory. The pepsin factory was the pepsin itself is an enzyme that Dr. Colwell extracted out of Seneca plants in an apple cider press on a storefront on the square. And that was very, very popular because it helped with diarrhea and constipation and alimentary canal. So gradually it got to be worldwide. Dr. Colwell was a long established doctor in the area, but he didn't want to be the entrepreneurs for this. The Pyatt family had a Pyatt house nearby the city and offered it as a place to enlarge the production. And eventually this became a 250 person factory with railroad heads, and this product went out to the world. It amounted to a state street that was full of multimillionaires. And so this was a productive area for Monticello. Okay, so you have Monticello as an attraction. It's not a crass attraction. It's biology, it's engineering, it's sociology, and it's economics. This attraction is bringing more and more tourist money to that community. The Railroad Museum is a major attraction, and Heartland Pathways bought 3 legs of railroad around the Monticello area. One is outside Alton Park. It is biologically significant because it has been found that there are Massasauga, eastern Massasauga rattlers at that location. The Department of Natural Resources has done a lot to burn the territory to encourage the native prairie, the remnant prairie. It's not the world's greatest remnant prairie, but it's the only prairie we have left. We've eaten it all up. So this is the best we have. And its value is much more valuable for as a wildlife sanctuary than it is as a recreational trail. It does have a ballast, which was the old railroad that ran through, and you could run a trail on it. But over and over and over, when you put a trail through a prairie and you deny its contiguity and its volume, then the remnant is ruined, because the people who recreate don't always know the value of this genetics that you'll need when you don't even know what you might want it for. There's a great temptation to put a road cut through this continuity, and we've been talking about that. So we have 6 miles of railbed in the Monticello Alton Park area, which goes towards Decatur. There's a 4-mile unit from Whiteheath into Champaign, where Champaign, Havana, and Western Historic Railroad is hoping to get historic trains from the Monticello Railroad Museum into Champaign. That's an okay leg. We also have a leg that goes 23 miles from Whiteheath to Clinton. And that's a leg that we're concerned about at the moment. It's mainly a recreational site, this one, instead of the preservation site in the Alton area. So it leaves the west side of a Monticello Railroad Museum corridor. The Railroad Museum owns the retired main line that we're working with. They also own some interurban corridor, which was a local train that would go between communities, electric trains. Whereas the original railroad would be opened up in the 1860s, the interurban didn't come in until there was electricity. But it was convenient, had a couple of little cars, and you could use it. So there's 7 miles of Railroad Museum territory there. And from the west of it, you go down to Shady Rest. And I'm about to take you on a corridor going to Clinton, because it's a very, very valuable corridor. It's approximately 100 feet wide, and it traverses interesting territories. So if you start at Whiteheath there is what is even called a Y. It's a triangle, and if you take a train down one side and across the bottom and back up, you can turn the train around without having to have a turntable. So that is known as a Y. So we leave the Y, and we pass over an access road to Whitey's, but then we go under 72. We're lucky to be able to go under 72 because 72 wanted to fill the land in and put on a highway on top. Well, with quite a deal of cooperation, the highway goes over the top and a train can go down to Shady Rest. It's just 1 mile. There's a creek culvert, a very big culvert, probably 30, 40, 50 feet long. And this is an embankment going down from the Cerro Gordo Marine to the Sangamon River. The Sangamon River is an attraction. This was a little town called Shady Rest. I'm not even sure it was called Shady Rest. Probably didn't even have a name. It's one of those towns that was located around the railroad that was located through the territory. So it was 30 acres. We managed to get that 30 acres into the Piatt County Forest Preserve. And they have the in perpetuity capacity to put in trails and work with it. It's a soil and water conservation easement that's designated by the Illinois Nature Preserve Commission, and it's a wonderful place to go to. It has that culvert went over a little creek that comes in, and the Sangamon is increasingly high at times because more people put in more roads and more settlement, and there's more runoff. But we hope that one day a train will go down a mile to Shady Rest, and will there, besides the preservation areas, there are some open space, and we had hoped to hold a chautauqua where people could come in and act like they would when they were in the late part of the 18th century, and people had meetings and speakers, and trains went there to stop, and you paid your 5 cents to get there. But if you were participating, you probably didn't even have to do that. We hope that will happen. We have been looking at the fact that when there's an embankment, you can't a trail alongside an embankment. So it's a matter of having a railroad bed that goes down there that will not be a bunch of gravel, but be smooth enough that people can ride a bicycle down or walk down. And if a train comes down, it doesn't have to be going at 80 miles an hour. It could be going at 2 miles an hour and find a destination, or even stop over, or there'll be little walkouts here and there so people can stand by and let a short historic train go down to a truss bridge, nice truss bridge, and people want it saved, and it is saved, and it's got bridge ties on it. And so we were in charge of that property for quite some time, owned by the Price family. They'd taken over when the railroad town didn't evolve, and there were lots of little cabins built here and there, so you could rent a cabin and go fishing for the week on the bottomlands of the Sangamon that flood every once in a while. Shortly, that goes up onto the Cerro Gordo Moraine, so you have uplands. So this is a good, diverse habitat, and it's an enjoyment to see it. So if we don't have a train, we have you walking down the corridor. That means we've been talking to ceramic engineers, because they are getting to the point where we don't have any more ties to put down anymore, no more wood. So you need about 2,000 ties a mile, and it's a mile. But these days they put down more than that. But if we're going down there, we probably aren't going to go down there with a heavy steam engine with a drive wheel that will break rails. We'll send a diesel or electric with still an antique train down with bogies that spread the weight, and they're lighter. So we will go across the bridge, hopefully, with concrete ties that are a mixture of clay, silicon aluminas, and polymers from marijuana type plants, hemp, that is very strong, and but it also bends, so that when a wheel goes over, the tie can move it on down a little bit without damaging, breaking the tie. So we think that we have a possibility of putting in a railroad with a trail. That means we have to have engine drivers who don't freak out when they see someone walking on the railroad line. I come from Australia, and there we had railroad lines across the country where the driver had to get out of the train, and the fireman, and chase the livestock off the rail. So with a little bit of care, you can have a rail going down to the segment and across the segment, just in case it runs off. We will take it to Shady Rest Road. Now, I want to say that park is really quite a wonderful park, and you should know about it. You can get to it right now by going to a parking lot which has been opened up, and you can enjoy it. And it's ripe at the present time for spring herbs. Now, we're going to go further west. We're going to go across Madden Creek, which is a creek that comes in on the west side of the segment. So there's some low territory there. And there's a bridge, another trestle bridge. And it's the sort of bridge that's light enough to take people and bicycles and light rail, but not a major steam engine. So that then climbs up onto the flatlands, which were the outward plains to moraines like the Bloomington Moraine. And you can see the Bloomington Moraine in the distance. This is prime farmland. So we go to Lodge. At Lodge, there is a north-south railroad line. It is active. And if we ever had the money to do it, we would not only rail down to Shady Rest, but we'd rail up to Lodge. And then, with the permission and all the appropriate details, you could take a train back down to Monticello and back into Nelson's Crossing, which is the headquarters of the Railroad Museum. That's a 23-mile trip. And it's the sort of thing people will love to do, to take a ride on a train that they've never ridden on before. Children especially have never ridden on a train like that. And so restauranting is a potential. It might be 50 years since, but we're putting together this skeletons that work. And
one pill for you, baby.
Okay. So I'm doing a radio program at the moment. So that circuit is in the imagination. This happens to be a national level railroad museum. It has 7 miles of line plus interurban line, but it also has the capacity to do things in the future. So you're lining, this is like building a cathedral in Europe. You do it over the centuries. So it's the skeleton. Now, when you get to Lodge, that line extends. So for the moment, while there's no railroad, you can come down from Whiteheath to Shady Rest and across the Sangamon, across Shady Rest Road, over Mountain Creek, and up to Lodge. And you can use that as a trail. So it's called interim trail use. That means you don't have to spend a lot. And that means also that we have little pieces of remnant prairie on either side. This corridor goes 20 miles to Clinton. It's not your best prairie. It's more a recreational trail. This is where you can go straight and fast. It's not going to be hilly or rounded bends, or that's provided the bicycles don't do wheelies off the side. So this has potential, not for immediately, but for the future. It also requires a lot of money. If you're looking at a counterpart trail that we've had a lot to do with in the Danville area, from Banner to Danville, that railroad bed is running with a budget of something like 25 million. If you look at that at the moment, that is spread over perhaps 200 years. That's provided we don't go into a different orbit and all poop out. We're hoping that doesn't happen, but humans are moving so fast, we're likely to not be here any longer. So anyway, we're at Lodge, and now we're going to go past this flatland that's well watered and well provided with soil nutriment and bacteria and fungi and all sorts of creatures in there, but it's been farmed to death. The humus, which is about 9 inches deep on a 10,000-year-old prairie, is now not working anymore. It's not there. It's been replaced by chemicals and fertilizers, and you're more or less planting in a petri dish that you've fertilized. So we're desperate to save little pieces of prairie along the line. But what's going to preserve this 20 miles is a rail corridor, interim trail use. And these are across the country and across the world to some extent. They follow railroads that have been obsoleted. And the public use is by hikers and bikers. But we have to teach the hikers and bikers to appreciate the genetics on either side. The Nature Preserve Commission founder, George Fell, worked on these sorts of things and created the Nature Conservancy. So he's got to be given accolades for doing that. And we have to keep going doing that. But we have to be careful not to ruin all the soil functions. People are getting worried about soils, and they're doing research on soils and finding much more activity in a remnant prairie than there is in a field prairie, cultivated prairie. So there were towns every 5 miles. And so the first one is Lodge, and then DeLand. And this railroad bed is straight, and it goes Lodge, DeLand, Weldon, Lane. And then there's another river corridor, or another drainage basin called the Salt Creek. And there's another moraine. It's called the Hensley Moraine. And it has nice rolling hills. And so we have tried to teach people that this corridor is very valuable. It's more valuable than locals can deal with. It's a national and a state your responsibility to put this together. If you need to do it in pieces, you can do it $2 or $3 million here and each year, and you can gradually make it work. They just put a bridge in over, or they've restored a bridge from railroad use to bicycle use in the Oakwood area near to Danville. It's 100 feet high. It's got 998 ties. It's amazing to some people who've never been on such a height before, 100 feet off the ground. They can enjoy it, and they look down on trees. And it has a lead into Kickapoo State Park. Well, this corridor, Lodge, DeLand, Weldon Lane, runs into the Salt Creek. So you have interesting terrain going down, and then you can go up the other side and on to a Hensley Moraine and into Clinton. Then you go back onto an active railroad line again. So in an area where you don't have a mountain, you don't have a lot of other attractions, this is wonderful stuff, and we've managed to buy it, but it will take a lot of you out there to work with it to get this into action. It had to be that way with the Kickapoo Trail. There was the Congress put together a rail banking act to save some of the corridors that they thought they were losing too much of. So they were prepared to buy or to give money to bicycle developers and hikers and biologists to preserve these corridors with interim trail use. And they have put $12 million into the Kickapoo Trail with its Kickapoo State Park at the other end. Here you have a trail that goes from Whitey's or Monticello through to Clinton with 2 state parks at the end. Clinton Reservoir and Clinton Lake and Wilder Springs State Park. 5 miles of this corridor can join those 2 parks with an interesting trail. Hopefully not too wide, just wide enough for 2 bicycles to pass, but not. This is not a recreational division. This is common sense biology as well as exercise, and it goes over interesting territories with interesting culverts, and it gives people a chance to free themselves from flat land in places like Champaign County. So it's an extra attraction. So we have been trying to fit into the Monticello framework, which is a regional, a classic visitors place for people who are farmers wall to wall. This was Jefferson Platte, where every section was nicely squared off. You bought 40 acres or 80 acres and square, except for where you go around the river, and that distorts things a bit. But the Jefferson Platte let people find the plot they'd bought in Europe sight unseen, and so the tree might have had a mark on it, or the rock might have been moved. So people had problems when they tried to find their property. But with the Jefferson Platte, that was kind of obsoleted, and we had squareness, which is okay. But the squareness disappears a little bit when you get to Clinton or to Hensley Moraine, or you get to Danville, and you get to Wisconsin, not the Wisconsin, the Wabash and the Salt Fork. And and it's different when you get to Decatur too. Just you look for these little places where people will find retreat and enjoy. It's part of life, and we have to pay homage to new generations that come along, and they don't have what their grandparents were having. There's no prairie left. There's and they keep planting trees on prairie that didn't belong to the prairie. The trees were needed drainage, so they had to be on the riverside where their roots could get drained. There were just a few, like the cottonwood, which would go out and be on the outwash plains, but basically the prairies were without trees. So we have friends of the Kickapoo Trail at the moment who would love to put trees on the prairie that doesn't look good because it just looks like a bunch of weeds. 6 generations we've been getting rid of that stuff. Why can't we have a few trees? Well, they don't belong, and we have to do a lot of work to make sure that we maintain now what's left of our almost extinct prairie, and it'll cost us to do something about that. It will cost the federal government. It'll take the challenge to do this, a little at a time. That's what happened with the Kickapoo Trail. It's a phase at a time. So the earliest phase was between Urbana and St. Joe, and immediately was wide. The ADA people want a wide trail that can have wheelchairs on them. They would like charging stations, but it's managed to take out the sort of prairie that was heritage that George Fell went to Washington to save. He'd been up there in Rockford preserving prairie where there was an airport that wants to expand, and they're at it now. And George is long since gone, but there's a whole pile of people asking the state if we can have laws that prevent the expansion of that airport runway to destroy a unique prairie. It's the laws allow the development as well as the recreation, and Ammer and others are desperate to provide the service of packages, and so O'Hare and other airports are not providing a service. So Rockford has become such. So there now are people who are asking for a change in the law, and we have people who've put together the Prairie State Conservation Coalition. Fran Hardy has been a leader in that. And part of the questions that they are asking for is for laws that allow the prairie to have an advocate and to have it work in lockstep with invaders so that we are on the same wavelengths and not screwing up the last little element of what we have. We have one of those elements at Monticello on one leg outside Elton Park, and Fran has also been involved in putting in, getting the university, which owns the park, to put in a mile by 66 feet of prairie that's now 12 years old with 3-year-old plants, 12 different species. It's not the world's greatest prairie, but it's enough to make a endangered rattlesnake happy. So we will hope to have a corridor that is in the western case from Lodge to DeLand to Weldon to Clinton as a recreational trail, but with enough foresight that people won't invade. So right now, we do have adjacent owners who have bought land on either side of the railroad bed, and they're determined to take it up. So here we are sitting in court trying to preserve the dignity of that corridor. So any of you that are listening out there on WEFT, which has been very helpful with this, or with Channel 6, we've tried to put pictures in to make this understandable. And the radio does well with imagination, but the video does well with details like where's this invasion? How was the line? Does anyone have the right to dig it up? Can we use a robot to see who's digging it up? And we need support. So we need people who are lawyers and also financiers, because these corridors over and over result in communities developing, enjoying themselves. They feed hikers and bikers. They have bike shops. They have the characters of the town evolve, and especially if they know something about their biology, they also learn about their biology. The biology that they didn't know about when they came here is either as peasants or entrepreneurs. So we want you out there, those of you who are listening, to start thinking about what your resource is. It's a one-time chance. If you lose it, it's gone forever. And the soil under that railroad bed is gone forever. And that's an insult to the world, because you have an ecosystem that's unique. And you need to know that if this corridor disappears, you're disappearing some of the last of an ecosystem that's unique to the world. If we go around the world collecting glycine and so we can have a soybean in 1936, then the rest of the world should be able to come and get your biochemical and do something useful with it in the future. But if there's nothing there, you've screwed it. They've given you a chance, but you've not given them a chance. So I'm after people who know what we're talking about, to be out there finding out where this property is. We need to be working together more. I've been talking to David Wisani. He's been doing for years, engineering my radio program and putting in pictures and letting you know where the Union Pacific Railroad comes through, or who owns what, when, how, and what we can do with it. And we have people who are developing reconstruction prairies, and that's not a bad thing. That's a very good thing, because it helps people understand that their ecosystem, their heritage ecosystem, has character. It can be dominated by grasses. Early on, when we were doing prairie preservation, people would plant grasses because they grow quickly and they wave their wooden leg in the air and the wind goes across them and it looks like what people imagine to be a prairie. But a prairie in this area has something like 110 species. And this railroad line just cuts across them, so they don't have 110 species for you to see. But you have 2 or 3 and you can wander around the line and find out where the rest are. And you can combine roadsides with interurban railroads and old roads and recreate some of your nature and your nurture. And at the end of the trail, say at St. Joe, there's a restaurant. It has bicycles on the wall. And guess what? They make money from this sort of activity. And you have people who can be in a bedroom community of St. Joe and ride into Champaign-Urbana on a trail with safety. You can have people in Monticello who can ride to Decatur or ride into Monticello. We won't have these facilities if we have a bunch of people putting road cuts across without going through the law. And so this is a lot of work. We need people out there who will help to put together proposals that might be a little at a time, but have an overall skeleton for the future. And please think 100 years or 200 years. This is not here and now doing details for the legalities of right now. The legalities may change in a few years. If we lose much more of our prairie, there'll be some people paying $1,000 for a twig of gentian because it's a unique plant or something like that. So the area near to Monticello is getting a regional recreational deal, and the library that's there has often 5 acres of ground for prairie education. And there's a hope to go onto the rail trail. We don't really want a rail trail now that after 34 years, the drier spectrum plants have come up onto the ballast, and I like to think that we have a wildlife preserve. There is a possibility. If you're in Wisconsin, it's different. Wisconsin caters for tourists a lot. They people have A-frame houses there for the weekend, or they have towns that are totally dependent on tourism, and people enjoy going to some rolling areas and some forests to the north, boreal forests near. Actually, we've got to worry about that because half the boreal forests go into toilet paper, and we're lost forever. People don't have a long-term point of view. They go into a town, colonial style, take out the resources that they need and pay the locals very little and disappear, or they became nabobs, nobles and riches. And so somehow we have to sort this out. And that's what we have to do with 20 miles from Lodge to Clinton. And we have to do it carefully and kindly because people don't know these things. The railroad beds look like wasted land. This is land that's not being used for agriculture. What the hell are you doing out there with wasting that land? Get out of our way and we'll plow it up and make money. That's okay. We don't need that. We're biologists and we want to preserve what's there. We don't enjoy corn and soybeans coming up to the ballast. We can be on roads all over the place that give you corn and soybeans up to the edge of the road. We would like to see some of those 100 odd prairie broadleaf plants waving their wooden leg in the air too, and saying hi to you. This is your heritage. This is where you landed. This is where you took over from the Indians, and they didn't understand that you wanted to own land, and so they were involved in various battles, sometimes with the English, sometimes with the French, but without a lot of preservation in their minds. So I'm after you. I'm after people who will help to put together the visual material. If we can't take you to the prairie, which is very common, people don't really have that much regard for prairie. If we can't take you to the prairie, we have to take the prairie to you, and we have to do it in a pretty efficient manner. And most of our stuff has been amateur, and we've had to learn how to handle computers and apps and all sorts of programs like Vegas to allow us to drop pictures into a radio program and make it a visual program. program. So we're looking for you to help in some way or another. Some people might be able to contribute to some finance, but it really requires your congressman, sometimes your internationally known people like the ecologists, E.O. Wilson and others in St. Louis. You need to back the ecologists in Duke University on the East Coast. You need to talk to the Canadians, which have Trans-Pacific Railroads, and they have boreal forests that's being wasted. Not wasted for agriculture, well, probably is wasted for agriculture, but it's for toilet paper to wipe your tail with. Do we need to do this? We're doing that. At the same time, we're complaining about people in the Amazon, getting rid of the Amazon, and our own ecosystem is getting to be dead. So I want you out there finding out where some of these places are, going to them, stop in a parking lot somewhere at a section road and walk the corridor. You know, you have to walk a half mile and come back, take the car somewhere else. That's how we find out about these places. We go to the section road and we walk in and we walk back and go to the next section road. It's a pain in the tail. But we managed to get a section of rail trail that was reasonably active. Farming on either side, so it's invaded by farm weeds and herbicide blow-off and fertilizer and whatever. So it's not the world's greatest, but it became the first piece of land owned by the Grand Prairie Friends, and the Grand Prairie Friends has done very well. It was encouraged. We had a conference, a prairie conference at Muhammad, and the people who were involved with that also became part of the Grand Prairie Friends, and they've done well for years. It seemed strange that it hadn't happened that way sooner, but it's happening, and it is. Grand Prairie Friends now has something like 1,000 acres of prairie forest ecosystem, and they're looking at millions of dollars to acquire land that will never be available again. We need your help. We're begging for it. We're not awfully well organized for it. The Kickapoo Trail is not quite established enough to be a sample. That's the only sample we have of a long run trail in this general region. This is rich soil, but a desert for rail trails. And there have been many. Every little community had trails 5 miles apart where the trains came through. So there's history here. Some of those towns that had to be moved to the railroad because they were located somewhere else. Atwood had to be moved from at the woods down to where the railroad came through. So Homer was something the same way. So we have history. We have cultural details. We have Norwegians here or Irish there. And, they have different behavior patterns. Some gamble and some don't. And some, so you're talking about Deutschlanders and Frieslanders, and you start to look at microcosms. You look at a six-inch drainage basin, so that there's very gentle runoff. But when you get 5 inches of rain, that gentle slope puts soil and fertilizer into the Gulf of Mexico and causes hypoxia or dead zones. So here we are in the richest soils in the world, screwing up the dead zone. So think about it. Think about whether you can give an hour here or there. Sometimes there's invasive species. That's a specific thing. Sometimes you take out the endangered species and start to allow the prairie to go back. It's in there. There's a gene pool, a seed pool, and we work at it. And you can work at it too. First thing is to learn the names of some of the prairie plants. Take a bunch of kids with you, and very shortly you'll find out what they're talking about and what they want to know about, and you'll learn the name of the plant. And then you'll learn about how to save it. If it's a butterfly, or a bird, or a bee, you'll want contiguity. And to hell with that road cut that's proposed. No road cuts. We have one disaster road cut at Monticello. We don't need any more. We don't need to break the continuity. There's all little farm access roads already. We just need the continuity so that animals and creatures and birds and bees and bacteria and fungi can move back and forth across the line, go to watery places if they want water, or go to dry places if they want dry. You got to know about this. It's going to take, if our imagination continues, and we are confident. I think I have board members that are gung-ho to try and save this corridor, and they're here now. I have to keep reminding them that there's perhaps 100 years, might be 200 years before we get kicked off the earth. But we need your help to think about your native ecosystem that's brought your wealth here, and provided with a welter of biology, geology, sociology, economics, and exercise. But don't let exercise, recreation, destroy your native stuff. Get to be an advocate